It's recording, I believe. Let's hope this works the same way it did last time. Otherwise, Dr. Fike is really going to be, well, disappointed. I don't know. My name is John Harvey, and this is slightly over half of the course. We'll see if Jack and Dylan and Alex show up. They usually do. And this is my two favorite lectures of the semester. The one we did last time where we went through all the business cycles one by one and looked at the data, and we're going to do it again, all right, because it's a lot to take in at once. It's also going to be on the final exam as well as on this upcoming exam. And today, however, we go to, and by the way, it's another thing, Dr. Quinn and Dr. Fike, the computer that hooks into this is right there. It's a royal pain in the neck. You have to go in the back of the classroom all the time. So I've now taken to just firing up the laptop and using it up here. But today we'll be doing the, I think, last study question before this exam. Yeah. Be sure you know the test summaries for each of the exogenous views. All right, so we've done, oh, pardon me, lad. Good to see you as always. See, I told you he'd be here. And I decided to type a few things up for this. I'm not usually big on handouts in class, but here we go, all right? Good luck. And this is going to be interactive today. I'm going to be calling on people. Oh, thank you very much. And we might as well put one down there in case Jack comes in and Dylan, yeah, come on, set there. And Dr. Quinn, I have one for you. And Dr. Fike, here is yours. All right, there we go. Okay, and so the problem today, as John Harvey typed up here just last night, is that we're going to try to go back through those four exogenous. I might do one of the endogenous ones too, but it's not going to be on the exam yet. And say, okay, well, what if you ended up one day, in fact, I believe I have that document pulled up right here. Yeah. What if you ended up one day in the financial industry and you're thinking to yourself, well, I thought the Montrose model made a lot of sense. So if that's true, what would you expect to see in the real world, all right? So to try to take each of these theories of how the business cycle works and say, well, what would I be looking for in the real world? Now, these are extremely simplistic tests, all right? And as it says in the opening sentence, to do something that would be comparable for each theory that would also be fair to what the designer of the theory wanted to do is impossible in here. We just can't do it. But I do want you to have some practice in thinking about these things, which honestly is far more important than remembering exactly when a particular recession took place, because it's problem-solving stuff. And so I made up some simple tests, all right? But I want you to think it through first. And this is the way I usually do this part of the course, is I try to have you guys figure out, well, what would I do? How would I figure this out? And so I'm going to give you, first of all, there's three essential questions you're going to have to ask yourself for each theory. And we're going to start with the monetary model, actually. I know you haven't, I know that was the last exam, but I'm going to put the study question answer up on the screen. First of all, which variable is that theory trying to explain? Because, like Keynes's theory of the business cycle is really focusing on how GDP growth fluctuates. But on the other hand, some of them are really talking about, like real business cycle, is really focusing on changes in unemployment or in employment. So your first question is, okay, with this particular theory, were they trying to explain unemployment or were they trying to explain GDP growth? All right, then you get the answer to that question. Now, okay, well, what do they think the main determinants were of that variable? And then what do I think the relationship ought to be between that main determinant or main determinants and what they were trying to explain? And then we check and see if the data support such a conclusion. And, okay, this was a big compromise. You know, I made a massive revision in this course. We used to only cover like 4 or 5 business cycle theories, and I expanded that to 8 by cutting a couple out that I was going to do. And this part of the course was going to get really complicated, so I made a simplifying assumption, all right? And my simplifying assumption is, we have every, as you know already, we have every cycle split up into 3 parts. Early to mid expansion, late expansion, which is at the last year of the expansion, and recession. And I'm not going to have you go back and look at what exactly was the GDP growth rate in the Eisenhower II period in the early to mid, what was GDP growth rate in the late part of that expansion and so forth. Let's just say we know that early to mid, late, and recession, when those happened, let's just assume that GDP growth rate tends to be highest in late expansion, tends to be lowest in recession. And that's a very safe assumption. I went back and checked through and said, okay, that's a pretty safe assumption, that generally speaking, average rates of real GDP growth rate tend to be highest in late expansion and lowest in recession. And then sort of the inverse of that, which is actually not as, this one you can find more exceptions, but just the inverse of that. Well, then unemployment's going to be lowest in late expansion and it's going to be highest in recession. Actually, the problem is that sometimes the early part of the recession, unemployment is still relatively low from coming out of this period. And then in the early part of early to mid, it's still kind of high because you've just come out of recession. So that one doesn't work quite as well. But again, I'm trying to simplify things here to make it work for our purposes. And I believe I am ready now. Switch to Document Cam and ask you, okay, again, what if you thought the monetary model was the one you thought made the most sense in this class? And remember the three questions, which is not, what is your favorite color and what is your quest, and so, which one person in class got, I know. Which variables are trying to explain? Now, it's been since exam 1 since you've done the monetary model, but what are they trying to explain? GDP or unemployment? Unemployment. All right, so we're trying to figure out unemployment with this one. I'm going to jot that down. Now, I also greatly simplified the way I did all these tests over the previous semesters, again, because I added more business cycle theories. But what does it come down to? When does employment fluctuate in the monetary model? Or maybe it's an easier question. When would it not fluctuate? Yes, Daniel?
I was going to say when the money supply changes, it fluctuates.
And when the money supply changes, then causes what?
Prices change.
Prices to change. And that's actually one of the places where I simplified the test. In the previous semesters, I also included the change in the money supply too. I was like, you know what? But let's assume they're right about that. Let's just assume they're right, that when you change the money supply, it changes prices, all right? So I cut that part of the test out and said, let's just look at the change in price. And realistically speaking, though, we're going to be talking about changes in the rate of inflation and changes in the rate of the wage rate. But, so we've got W over P on the vertical axis. We've got employment down there. And in this model, when prices went up, which we'll later change to, okay, well, when inflation went up, which way did employment go, up or down? And I haven't even thought about it myself yet. Okay, I got it.
Prices go up, then workers are seeing a lower wage, and so they will offer to work less even if the wage that's on them, they offer more.
Yeah, it's a little bit, remember, who suffers from money illusion?
Workers.
So they don't think the prices have changed at all, right? The firms know the prices, and so when they see prices go up, what do they offer in terms of nominal wage?
Less.
That's real wage. In nominal wage, they offer more. Because remember, let's see, which one have I got up here? I did the decrease in price example. Let me go ahead and pull up the one that's appropriate for the increase in price. There it is. Okay, so we had an increase in the price level led to us moving from W sub 0 over P sub 0 to W sub 0 over P sub 1. And now we've got this big excess demand for labor. Why? Because the firms are like, man, the prices that we get have gone way up. We're still paying the same wage rate. We need to hire some more workers. You know, this is a good situation for us. We're going to be able to earn more money. And so, but no more workers are forthcoming at the old wage rate. So then they start to raise the nominal wage rate, which attracts workers and also causes them not to want as many workers. And then they eventually reach an equilibrium where, by coincidence, right over top of each other is the real wage that actually prevails, which is going to be W sub 1 over P sub 1, and the real wage that workers think prevails, which is W sub 1 over P sub 0. So, indeed, you get that. So, all right, think about this. And I believe I'm ready to hand out my next document. New classical. Keynesian. Should have brought my glasses with me. Monetarist. Okay. So there's going to be your theory. Your theory is going to be, I'll bet that when inflation accelerates, because again, if we're going to do a more sophisticated version of this model, especially back when this model was popular, we didn't expect prices to go down, we expected them to go up, and so everything was sort of expressed in terms of rates of inflation of both prices and wages. So if I see an acceleration in the rate of inflation, I expect a decline in unemployment, right? So, and going back to my simplifying assumption, I didn't put unemployment data on here. Again, this is one of my simplifications. I didn't put unemployment data on there, but you're going to operate on the assumption that unemployment tends to be lowest in late expansion and highest in recession. Now let me give you this page first, and then I'll ask you what we need to do next. Good luck. Oh, that's right. It's part of your tuition dollar. I'll walk down here. Now TCU is favored, of course. Now that their quarterback is out for 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. Of course, we had to put in a substitute quarterback in the Alamo Bowl.
And that worked out well.
Yes, that worked out really well. Good luck. So, here's what I want you to do. Now, and Dr. Quinn and Dr. Fike, we have a name for each cycle that is not necessarily exactly descriptive. For example, the September 11th, 2001 cycle, the recession was actually already underway, but it was an easy way to remember the order of these events. So on, pardon me, Ike 1, if you figure that unemployment, according to my simple assumption right here, which I'll fold under so you can see that as well. Okay. We're expecting unemployment to fall from early to mid to late, and then rise from late to recession. Is the rate of inflation doing what you would expect on those first two transitions? We're going to have two questions to ask here. Is it consistent here, and is it consistent here? So, have a look at your page there and decide that. I'm going to have you work out all the others by yourself here in a minute. Yeah, if unemployment's falling here, would you have expected inflation to have accelerated or decelerated?
Accelerated.
And it did. It went from 0.24 to 3.61. And then if unemployment went up, would you have expected inflation to have accelerated or decelerated? That's right, and it did. So it works on both of them. Now the way I was scoring this myself, let me get a pen here. The way I was scoring this myself was, and I have all these results already typed up for you and available on the web page, so that, because I expect you to be able to do this on the exam, and so you need to already know how to carry out these simple tests. So I have this on the web page, both with blanks, so you can practice, and with the answers, all right?
Why is the early to mid so low then?
I don't know. I mean, we'd have to go back and look at those specific data to see. Yeah, but that's an excellent point. Actually, I was going to make that. What I don't bother to look at, because again, for simplification, I'm not going to bother to check, what about the recession to the early to mid? So I'm going to treat each line as an independent observation. Again, for simplicity. Again, I just want you to get a little practice in thinking about these things and how it would manifest itself in the real world. Realistically speaking, obviously we wouldn't be doing it this way to start with, but then we would also want to know, yeah, but what about the transition from that recession to that early to mid expansion? And that one's not going to work very well at all. But we're not going to test that. So what I was doing was I was given a half a point credit for getting this one right, and a half a point credit for getting this one right. So this first one is, it gets a 1 out of 1. Second one, is this consistent? Oh, hands up for yes. Hands up for no. Wow, the no's outnumbered the yeses, which is sadly wrong. Because what I sometimes promise to do is to teach the rest of the class by the majority answer, regardless of whether it was right or wrong, but I'm not going to do that. Look, inflation accelerated and we expect unemployment to decline. That's precisely what we expected. Is the second one consistent?
No.
That's right, it's not. So I'm going to give it a 1/2. Now, what I want you to do right now in the privacy of your own cubicle, is to check the rest of them. Shouldn't take too long. You're just checking one number. And then, when you're done, I brought with me today my most special dice of all, which cost me about $50, because these are game science dice, and they are not machine buffed at the end of the process, so they're almost guaranteed to be exactly totally random. I did see a guy's webpage where he tested them, and it worked extremely well. You end up with some of the sprue on here that you have to cut off yourself, but yeah, so I have an 8-sided die here that I was going to bring in case all 7 people were here. I'll pull out the 6-sided. All right. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll ask you guys what you got. And I guess at the bottom maybe total it up. That way you won't have to read through each individual line. And let me see what I got when I did it. Here it is. And I started off with a simple one, by the way. It's going to get much more complicated after this. One of them very much so. But anyway, let's see. Monetarist. Okay. Yeah, all right. So just sum whatever you get in that right-hand column. Oh, and I'm sorry. I've got that big X in Volcker because there was no early to mid expansion. Remember, I'm counting late expansion as the last 4 quarters. Well, the entire, in this one right here, in between this Oil Shock 2 and Volcker, the entire expansion was only 3 quarters. So we don't have a last 4, we don't even have a last 4 quarters. So you don't have to bother testing that one at all. You could, and if you did, actually it would get half a point credit on that one, but I just put an X there and say, well, let's forget about that. Okay. By the way, this hurts because they have not buffed down the corners of the dice, which is what makes them so much more accurate. All right, let's find out who's going to give us the answer. 2, John. What'd you get?
For Vietnam?
Oh no, for the whole column, if you added it together. Oh, that's right. Let's see.
You're talking about the entire consistent column?
Exactly, yeah. Like, I've got 1, 1/2, and what that adds up to there. Rather than make you read off each individual column by itself.
All right,
That's right. 1,
3,
2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and you don't have to do the average without Volcker at the bottom there.
6?
I got 5, but let's see.
I might have gone too quick.
0.5, 0.5, 0.5, nothing, 0.5. We have one disagreement on the subprime crisis.
Whoops, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we got the same thing. So, oh wait, no, that's still, but you probably added in the very last one too, yeah. So yeah, I got 5. I'll show you what I got right here. You zoom out. Oh, that's Ike 1. That works for everything. And this is actually what's available on the webpage with the results for each one.
5.5.
Yeah, I think that's 5.
Well, that one is the average of the entire column. Yeah, that last one there, you're quite right. It is 5.5 if you include that, but that's like the average. What if I just looked at all the numbers on average? What would I get? And half the time it would work. The problem is going into late expansion. Going into recession. Oftentimes the rate of inflation was higher. Now is this a fair way to do it? No, is the short answer to that. That first of all, we haven't even taken into account in any way the magnitudes involved. I mean, look at the change in Ike 1 from early to mid to late. That was a massive increase in inflation. So we would be very curious about, did that cause a massive decrease in unemployment? Whereas let's find one that's not so big. How about here from Desert Storm? It went from 3.66 to 4.59. That's not a really big, it increased, so it's consistent. But it's not a lot. And so, I wonder if the change in unemployment was lower here. We didn't take that into account. All we did was just a simple correlation to see, hey, if that theory is right here, there, then what would you tend to expect? You tend to expect unemployment to decline with inflation and unemployment to increase with deflation or decelerating inflation. And did you get that? 5 out of 8? I mean, for a crappy little test, I don't know. Let's see what else we get. Now, let's do the new classical model. And I don't know if you remember how that worked, because again, that's exam 1. But remember, the new classical model was basically the Montrose model with one exception. And let me show you that one exception. Oh, it's on the bottom of this page. Now, the only thing that affects unemployment is unexpected inflation, all right? So, if I expected, well, basically what it's saying is you don't suffer from money illusion. You don't suffer from money illusion if you read the paper and read that, oh, the government's increasing the money supply by X amount, I'll bet inflation is going to accelerate from early to mid to late, and you already taken into account and your supply curve adjusts appropriately. Yes, Daniel?
So would they be thinking that the times that it would effectively be like wartime spending that is not disclosed?
That would be for fiscal policy, but yeah, I mean, that sort of thing, where it was a surprise. Whether it be because the government sort of quietly did it, or, didn't reveal the statistics, or there was some sort of external shock or whatever that caused inflation or deflation that was unexpected, but it can only be unexpected. All right, where do you get unexpected inflation data? Well, they do publish series where they have surveyed people. I think it was the University of Michigan has this series where they survey people, what do you think inflation is going to be? All right. So you could use that. And that was the first thing I did when I was putting the data together for the class. But then it was like, oh, it doesn't go long enough. So in the system dynamics literature, there is a theory of how people form expectations. And this guy named John Sturman has created some pretty good equations to say, okay, really, people are forming expectations based on what just happened, all right? Sort of a weighted average of what just happened. And so what I did was I just experimented with some weighted averages of what just happened. And let me go back up to the top here. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong screen. I created my own expectational data, all right? What I did was I played around with using people are having sort of a lagged expectation. If inflation was 6% last year, do I think it's going to be 6% this year? Well, pretty close. All right, so I had to create my own data here, and that is, new classical. This is unexpected inflation. And basically what I've done is I've taken what inflation, what they expected, or actual inflation minus what they expected. So if you get to 0, it was exactly what I thought. And therefore, what impact should it have on unemployment? That's right. You should stay exactly where you started. No impact whatsoever. Now, if it's greater than 0 and there was more inflation than I expected, should employment, I'll say employment this time, should employment go up or down if you didn't expect prices to go up, and they did? Another conflict. We're back to this. But only now it's only unexpected. Right, so only unexpected inflation causes workers to go back to work because the firms offer higher wages because they're trying to attract these workers because their prices went up, but the workers think these are higher real wages. So
employment does go up.
Employment does go up, exactly. Yeah. Unemployment goes down. I'm sorry, I shouldn't switch back and forth. No change, unemployment. Fall, unemployment. Rise, unemployment. All right. Now let me ask you this, though. This one's not going to be... So again, I made up these data, all right? I went through and I compared them to the University of Michigan's data. And I messed around with my equation until I got about the same thing as the University of Michigan had, and then I just used that same formula for data that the University of Michigan didn't have. Dylan, you didn't fill out the other one. Now, let's see here. Good luck. May the force be with you. Et voila. So this is showing unexpected inflation for each of those time periods. Let me plop this down on the overhead. All right. Let me get my die out. Where's my die? Oh my God, I can't lose that. That's expensive. Yes. Oh, here it is. All right. This is not going to be exactly the same, so I'm going to ask you, how are you going to test this one? It's a little bit out of focus, isn't it? Well, I'll just put it up on this screen. Laptop.
I would think that just whether it's positive or negative.
Thank you. The transition from one to the other makes no difference now. That's right. It's just whether it's positive or negative. Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Let's see here. Now, what I did with this one was, let me go back and double check here. What we're still going to have to think about is changing unemployment, right? So when we come from here to here, we would have expected unemployment to have fallen. From here to here, we would have expected it to have risen. So we're kind of asking the question about, we don't really even going to bother with the first column, all right? We're just going to look at the second column and the third column there, late in recession. And it's really easy. What are you going to expect for every late recession? If unemployment has fallen, then late recessionary unexpected inflation should always be?
Negative.
Or? Yes, exactly, yeah. Because we're assuming that unemployment has fallen from here to here. So therefore, it must have been some inflation right here nobody expected. And so they all went back to work. All right, so it's very easy to get, you get a half a point for getting this column right. And then, but this one ought to be, since unemployment would have gone up, it should always be what number?
Should be negative.
Should be negative. Everyone should be negative. That's right. So as I say, this one's a lot easier to check. Go ahead and fill it out. Let me just ask you, what are you going to have on the first one? 0, 1/2, or 1? That's right. Because the late recession one part works, but, late expansion part works, but the late to recession does not. So let me see what I got. I don't remember. And then I will roll the die again. John, you are exempted this time since you were selected last time, which means I could select a 4-sided die. Do I have one with me? I do.
$2, I should have given you your 5-sided die.
Yes. I do have a 4-sided die.
We're only doing the late and the late expansion and recession?
Correct. Yeah, and you go around through, let's see what John Harvey got here. And don't remember, you don't need to add in the average without Volcker at the bottom there to find out your total. And you skip the one that has the big X over it. The big X was my principal in high school, Father Xavier Mankel. We called him the X. One time, I was teaching a class in Smith, and somebody had left behind a USB that turned out to have all kinds of stuff for the class on it, and their resume and that sort of thing. And somebody else had left a bag of dice, very much like these. Wrong thing. We found out the owners of both. Guess which one was picked up first?
Nice.
Yes, and Dr. Quinn and I had already talked about splitting them up between ourselves. So, but yeah, and the USB was never picked up. I don't know why it's not focusing there. Let's see. Focus. Oh, AF for autofocus. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So let's roll the 4-sided die. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4.
Chosen.
DB. You have indeed.
So I have a total.
That's what I got. Let's see here. Yeah, I got 4 out of 8 as well. I guess the September 11th when it worked for the whole thing. Yeah, and then otherwise.
It's 1/2 and then I 2, 0.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's what I got as well. So again, now it depends so much. Okay. Let's say we did this and we came up with 0 out of 8. We might be able to legitimately say, yeah, but I'm not sure my data were very good. Because this is testing a hypothesis heavily dependent on another hypothesis, and that is that the way I created the variable for expected inflation was actually reasonable. And there's a very good chance that the way people predict inflation changes over time as well. There's no reason to believe it stays the same the whole time. And so this is, not only is this a difficult way to test something anyway, but then we're also dependent on the fact that John Harvey actually calculated unexpected inflation properly. And you see this in economics where that we did a test, it didn't work, but we think our data were wrong. Well, That could be. That's, sometimes they can say, well, if you shouldn't have conducted the test then. Well, it's quite possible you have an outlier or you have poor data. And in this case, I would especially think that the poor data could be a problem, although it didn't do terribly, 4 out of 8. All right, let's move on. Now, as I said, we're going to get slightly more complicated here. I say that. This one's actually still fairly simple. It's going to be the neoclassical Keynesian stuff that we're really going to have to think about. But let me now move on to... Remember these guys? And I greatly simplified this theory in class, the real business cycle stuff. Basically, the idea is that shocks to productivity are going to cause shifts in the marginal product of labor curve that cause workers to decide, oh, I'll come to work then. They're going to pay more. And so during high productivity periods, you have unemployment over here, employment at N sub 2, middle productivity at N sub 1, and low productivity at N sub 0. Now, I got to tell you, first of all, I said in that opening page here, being fair to the intentions of the original scholars, I'm being really unfair in this case, all right? Because they view this as a very long-run phenomenon, that a shock has waves, if you will, for some years thereafter, whereas I'm forcing it to fit right into the business cycle. All right, so again, we're going to have a problem with exactly how it's being tested.
Well, I gotta get better angle.
Yeah,
And there we are.
thank you.
Fairly well lit.
Let's see. And so here are the data. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do this first. All right, I'm sorry. So what kind of data do you want to test this? What do you figure John Harvey pulled up on the Fred database to try to figure out, okay, if can I find some data that we can use in class to test this one?
Labor participation.
Participation is going to determine where N sub 3 is. N sub 3 is, if labor participation increases, it's going to shift out to the right or back to the left. I'm assuming that this is our voluntary unemployment. Well, no. That's going to shift the supply curve, actually. N3 is just, because remember, this school of thought said that all unemployment is voluntary. It's just that the CEO is not willing to work at Walmart. So what we want is what causes unemployment to change. And what do they think causes unemployment to change?
Wage.
And why does the wage change?
The function of productivity.
Productivity. Labor productivity. So the labor productivity is causing the shift, which then causes the wage to change, which then causes workers to decide to go back to work or to leave the workforce voluntarily. And so I looked up labor productivity data. And here they are. Real business cycle. And I have at the bottom exactly what labor productivity I used. Again, even though I didn't make this one up, you've got the problem of, are these data reliable? But that's all we got to work with.
Thank you.
Good luck, certainly.